Okay, it looks like we're live. Hi,
Happy
Jonathan.
New
Good to see
Year.
you.
So yeah, this is great to start the new year in front of a heap of choppings.
A big ant's nest. This is, actual fact, if you go into our local forest, we're at local forest, as in literally, it's like 50 meters down the road, down the path. You'll see various, also numerous types of these ants nests there. It's a regular part of our morning walk.
It's brilliant because it kind of invites a bit of that potential of the new year. Is there's everything that's been chopped down and is ready, and it's all in a heap, and you can make it.
Yeah.
So
But
make it
the,
into something
the
new.
amazing thing about these things is they are, I mean, you've got the ant colonies, because obviously these are pine trees and fir trees that is like those are pine trees. I can see in the picture we're looking at.
Sure.
And the ants, they go along and they pick up all the pine needles. So every single pine needle that's been brought there, an individual ant has picked up, that's like brought to
Right.
that nest.
That's a useful thing. I'm going to bring it home. And I'll put it on top of the home. The home will get rid of it.
on the could be good to have pile.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll find use for it later. Well, it's interesting you've got that there. It'd be interesting to see why that's there specifically. But it does also bring to mind what's been on my mind lately, which is in a sort of a metaphorical sense, because I've been using a chat bot called
Mhm.
Chat GPT. I understand there's several out there, and I only just had a go, and I used it to. It's they call it AI, but I think it's a
Mhm.
misnomer. It's not intelligent. It doesn't know what it's doing as such, but it's able to perform functions
Yeah.
phenomenally successfully. And what you can do is you can just type in. You say, "Write me in a poem in the style of Keats," and it will have a bash at that by trawling the internet and making it somewhat original in the sense that it won't copy a poem of Keats.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and or what I didn't try that. What I was using it for was I asked it, say, give me a, a, a lesson for a second language English, a 19-year-old second language English speaker using, or give me an exercise using um, the future forms and the past tenses. And
Mhm.
so it gave me, sort of a page of uh, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, explain the past tenses. And then it said, and it did it really succinctly. And I thought, wow, I'm going to use that because that is so succinct and clear. There was one mistake in that part, and so I had to check it and correct that bit. And it gave a spelling mistake as well in another one, and
Mhm.
you can give it feedback and you can say, okay, that was quite good, but tweak it a bit and press go, and it gives it another go. Or you can ask it to do anything that involves text. I don't know if there's speaking ones at the moment,
Yeah.
and it just enters as much of the internet as it can reach. I don't know how much is hidden from a chat bot or AI, but everything that's out there, and then it will organize it according to what it has learned. It would be coherent English and fulfilling my requests.
It
So
sounds like an amazingly powerful tool in the right hands,
yeah, it
but
makes me.
also in the wrong hands.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like it could walk up to this ant's nest and take every little piece like that. If that's all the bits of the internet, and it would form them into whatever you wished, and then you'd say, okay, I've finished with that, and then do something else, and it would form it again. Um, which is why that ant's nest reminds me of that, because you can imagine all these bits of throughout the internet, and it
Bits of
just
data separate, being
yeah,
brought together by another intelligence.
yeah, it collates stuff. It can't create anything original or out of nothing
Yeah.
as such. And just as a quick sort of addition to that is I had a go some while ago at some so-called AI artist. Where you
That's
say,
been raising some controversy as well, hasn't it? With I think several magazines have been saying we refuse to use that type of content. Am I
right,
correct? Do you
I'm
recognise
not
that?
sure about that, but my own experience was what I asked it to do, and what I've seen is it's in that where it's a visual creation, it's always slightly twisted. Do you know what I mean? There's
Mhm.
something strange, but there's something a little bit sinister about it, and I think it's because it's trying to be original. So it would do a face and then kind of drop half of it a little bit, and you're
Like
kind of
give it
like,
an Aramanic sort of like as like a longer chin or something like that.
it could be, yeah, but I think that's its idea of not of wanting not just to give you a photographic image, but to make it
Yeah.
original. But it just kind of twists it, which gives it a sinister thing. So it can't, like it can't, it doesn't have that the sense of beauty. Um,
It's
it
so interesting, isn't it? Because how important symmetry is in the experience of beautiful.
or balance at least, yes,
Yeah.
balance,
Hmm.
yeah, and harmony, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I imagine, who knows where it might go, but I imagine at the moment, it may have trouble between, okay, this is perfect symmetry and sort of, fractal balance or something. But I need to, they're asking me for some art. It needs to be original. So I have to just change
Hmm.
something, but it doesn't really have a feeling sensation for how now that's thrown that out and that person's looks a bit odd. Why? It doesn't have the deeper sense of what it all means. So it does a great job, but
Yeah. It's interesting it's come up on your radar because it's also come up on my radar. Literally, I mean, it's been in the media a little bit, hasn't it? Um, but I've added a couple of more, or a couple of ants have given me a couple of new perspectives
yeah,
on what these chatbots are, what they might be, what they might represent. And this in no way is a full picture because I'm skimming the surface of something that I'm new to. But it is interesting. It's like the disparate bits of information that I've picked up on. Because one of the articles I was reading was talking about how this is actually a huge challenge to Google's business model. Now, let's just take that supposition as correct, that it is, then that is already sort of like that makes it like hugely interesting and hugely um, threatening for certain interests, like Google, for example. So I thought that was an interesting reflection here. This chatbot that's has been sprung out of nowhere on an unknown public. I know there'll be techs out there who've known about this for a long time, but for your average
yeah,
person, this is something new. And
it's
you see
just
all this talk
arrived. Yeah,
about it, what's going on.
yeah,
And so this idea that it's a threat to Google, I thought was really interesting. And then having read that, I think it was 1 or 2 days later, I started seeing it pop up in mainstream media about how this chat GPT wasn't all it was cracked up to be. So I saw a lot of dissing going on in mainstream papers. And that immediately made me think, gosh, perhaps this
mhm,
story is actually a lot more interesting. I had just I put it on the semi-interesting pile, but
mhm.
suddenly I'm beginning to see huge power plays going on here, possibly. And that's it's like all these the corrupted papers that have been bought out by certain interests. They feel the need to attack this newcomer at the behest of the people that sponsor them. As these are early days of my thinking on this particular thing, but I do think it's interesting that it's become a topical of conversation. I thought I'd read that article and never talk about it again. But then you and I, the first thing we're talking about after the new year is this. And also you talk about, you're obviously using it in a language teaching purpose. I work as a language teacher as well. So I'm beginning to think, oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds really interesting and powerful. So I'm going to have to go along and have a play afterwards, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think it's relevant here to the exceptional state, which is why I brought it up here. Apart from that heap of sort of trailings reminding me of kind of the way I see it working, is, and I wonder if this is somehow related to what you were saying, the threats that Google and media companies and so forth are feeling, is that it's because it can essentially do anything for us that involves text and presumably speech very soon. People could ask it to prepare and do anything for it, so it can do it very well, and in styles you ask, and you can ask it to write you some code. So a program could say, write me some code for such and such. That's their job, and they don't have to do their job. The chatbot will do it for them. They just hand it in, and that obviously, a journalist could perhaps just hand in a piece that the chatbot. So the journalists might feel threatened because they might say, okay, so the newspaper can just use chatbots. They don't need me anymore. And sort of taking that all the way down to the line, because in education, like teachers, the student could ask the chatbot for a lesson. Do they need a teacher? The teacher could ask a student for an assignment, and the student could have a chatbot write the assignment. So do the teachers need students in that sense? It kind of, and so the whole question to me here is that it sidelines so much of what we do for us, because it can do it very easily and quickly. Then the question is, what is left for us to do? What is left for the human being if a so-called intelligence is being developed that can operate at a much more powerful and efficient level than human operations using intelligence? Where do we stand in all this? What is different from us and these? Have we got anything that these cannot do? And I think the exceptional state is sort of bringing into hard relief what the exceptional state and everything of that ilk is offering, or everything in that direction is offering.
We had it is such a deep question. I'm going to try and give a picture. There's something that happened this morning, which bring up our relationship to thinking, observation, all this type of thing. So we went out for a walk with the dog this morning, and it was quite foggy, and we live by, it's like a big lake, and so we walked past this area, and normally you can see the lake out there, but at the moment, or this morning, you could only see the yellow reeds there, and then the cloud cover, or the fog was so thick you couldn't see the water, and it looked like, if you didn't know better, if your thinking hadn't inserted the fact from memory that there's water there, you could have looked at that and equally thought it's like there could be cliffs there, that it could be the end of the world there, because there was literally nothing but grey. So you had these yellow reeds in clear relief, and then the end of the world.
Wow.
And it might sound like a trivial picture that I'm bringing up, but it was my wife who pointed it out, And I saw what she saw, and then realized why I hadn't seen that, because I automatically added something that wasn't there to sight. I added the memory of the lake. And this is something we are continually doing in life. We are adding something that isn't given to us by the outside world. It'll either be thinking, original thinking. We'll try and tie this back to AI as we walk through this, but we are continually adding understanding, pictures, references, contexts to everything we see. We are never just seeing things. We are always looking at them in the context of what we know about things, what we expect to be there. It's like the model of the world conception that we have, how it fits into that, and various ways. And I thought it was that. So that could be one way of answering your question. So, like, what do we human beings do that AI doesn't do, or does it? Because AI is identifying patterns in what is in the given, isn't it?
It can do that, yeah. Well, I think it's part of the question here, and it is a very interesting question because I've had some discussion before on this, and I have kind of two minds about it, which is one that because AI doesn't really reflect on what it's doing, it's just performing functions that it has been programmed and given to do.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, it just performs function. It's not really conscious of what it's doing. But my other mind is, but how did we become conscious? Because in a certain from a certain view, we are physical material, much like a computer, and even the cloud it's some physical processes. So it is possible for consciousness to work in physical. So who's to say that it could be many cycles of eons of evolution that a what begins out just as very crude sort of mechanical structures could not take on consciousness from some as yet unknown process.
Okay, I'd like to add something there, just a little bit more detail around AI. Fun fact, I don't know whether you know this about me, but I actually did a master's in finance a couple of years ago.
Great.
And
finance is really interesting.
As a result of doing that, I actually got quite heavily into programming, a language called R. And no, unless you're into statistics and that type of thing, you probably wouldn't be. But the reason I'm bringing it into this conversation is this is off the back of actually doing this master's. I decided I was going to learn R to program. I've actually got some of stuff out there, some programming that I've created and that type of thing. But one of the things to teach myself, I looked at, there were various really interesting courses online where you could teach yourself aspects of R. And one of them was how you teach artificial intelligence programming. And so in this particular module, what you were doing is you were going through the process of, for example, in cars, how does a car, dumb computer, recognize that a stop sign is a stop sign and not a give way sign and not a speed limit sign and not all the different signposts that are out there on the road? And it comes down to mathematizing. It's like the amount of red, the shape of the image, that already gives you as a clue as to the type of signpost it is. If you know your highway code, that's like already gives you a big clue. But then the computer, it doesn't read the stop sign. What it does is it looks at the amount of red in there, and it computes whether that would match up. But life isn't actually even as simple as that, because as an artist, you'll realize that when we see red, we don't just see red. We see sort of like shades of, depending on how the light is falling on it, that will dramatically impact. It's like the retinal impact, if I can put it like that, the intensity of the red that's going to be on it. So if you've got it's like sun like blasting down on it, it's like bleaching out everything, that's going to be radically different from a soft light on a red signpost, or a signpost with a lot of red. So you also, in that AI, you have to build in the compensatory, like mathematics, to be able to allow for these variations in there. And how you then transfer that ability to mathematize the recognition of signs and human beings. What are human beings to a car with so-called what do they call it? Automatic driving intelligence. The
self-driving.
Self-driving, yeah. So how does it recognize the difference between a person, which it shouldn't run over, and I don't know, so something painted like a person on the road, these type of things.
Yeah.
Jeff's just joined us.
Oh, cool.
Yes. What are you doing here? Hi, Jeff.
I couldn't resist.
Sorry. So, Happy New Year.
Good to see you, Jeff.
Happy New Year to you guys. Yeah. I have a little bit of a cold. I apologize.
Okay. I can see you'd be your coloring would be very confusing to AI there. It might think you're in like a moon dust cloud. Good.
I'm glad. I've been listening, so I don't want to interrupt.
Just carry on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when people talk about artificial intelligence, it's vastly simplifying what I just described, but at the root of it is a mathematizing and a statistical analysis of those numbers, because a computer only works with numbers. Even all the information that we're seeing on the screen at the moment, that is all just a coordinate system with an RGB code saying, put that color there. But there's no intelligence. There's no intelligence there, so like extracting the information in the way that we extract information, understanding in a completely different way from which a computer does. It's looking for numerical patterns. And then how you then transfer that to writing a poem in the style of Yeats or whatever, that's way beyond something that I'm capable of describing at the moment. But at the root, it's like computers are zeros and ones. It's binary, and it understands numbers. And when you get people in bought off papers, so like saying computers are sentient and that type of thing, as soon as I see that, I'm not dismissing it. All I'm saying is, in my world, that isn't a possibility yet.
Yeah, but there's a very interesting thing here which I can't fully comprehend, which is that computers and AI and so forth, they work in discrete units. So to work out the gradations of red to see if it's a stop sign in a shady sort of moment, it can only work as well as the pixelization as possible. So you can, the smaller the gradation, the finer the gradation, the more subtlety of color and shading it could pick up. But the thing is that we don't ever see finite things. color just, there's the trouble is we've kind of tricked ourselves all these years, because we tend to draw, when we tend to draw an outline and fill it in, but it's not like that in reality. There's just color. And
That's right,
where one color doesn't just, red doesn't just end and white starts. It all bleeds and shades and gradates. And so the only thing that whereby we can determine where one thing begins and one thing ends is the thing that you mentioned right at the beginning, that we add to it. It's a process that happens in us. And so my question about all the AI and the computers and stuff like that is, they do work in discrete units.
Yeah.
But because discrete units don't really exist in reality, it's something that in the reality that our sensual reality, we have to bring, let's call it a mental reality for now, to it. What is it that is performing that function in the machines? Do you see what I'm saying? Because
the individualization, the atomization of, is that what you're talking? Is that your question?
Well, yeah. Let's say that the machine has to recognize a circle. A circle does not exist because if you draw a circle on a piece of paper, a perfect circle will never exist. As you look closely, it will fade away. It will be little grains, minuscule grains of graphite here. It will not be a perfect circle. It's various splodges. Like you cannot find a straight line. You cannot find the edge of a knife, because as you zoom in, there's 1 nanomillimeter of a curve there. There's no edge.
Yeah, but
do you know what I mean?
So you can work with tolerances. So, for example, it's like a strict scientist would be able to say there is no such thing as a perfect circle. Yet all of us go around talking about circles in
we all
real
know
life.
what a circle is.
People know what a circle is, and that also means a computer, because human beings have a tolerance. We don't go around saying, if I say this is a circular watch, you don't go and say, well, no, it's not, because it's sort of like 2 micro nanomillimeters sort of like off there and this type of thing. You say, yeah, it is. There's a tolerance in your thinking, and computers and all production works with tolerances. You don't, perfection is, it depends on your tolerance levels. And that applies equally to programming as well as to so using programming to recognize patterns. What I mean here.
There is that. That's one thing. But I'm pointing to something a bit different. But it's getting a bit metaphysical and maybe too far off our main thrust here. But it's the kind of point of so even to have tolerance, there needs to be edges, like discrete units, which they kind of say, okay, that's good enough a circle. That's near enough to how I've been programmed to recognize a circle. But even there, like, where?
Because just an interesting thing about your circle. I'm just looking for something that's circular. This is circular. Okay, this is circular. Is that still a circle? Is that still a circle? Is that a circle? They're all circles, but depending on the angle that you're looking at it from, that is also a circle. Yeah. So and just like mathematically, geometrically, you can sort of like you can describe a circle and then do like a mathematical process to it, skewing and stretching and these type of things, which
giving it fuzzy edges, so you don't have to be.
I didn't mean so much fuzzy edges. What I mean is it's called a geometrical transformation.
Okay.
That basically is like x equals 2y plus x will basically elongate that circle, for example, and you can use computers to like get a closest closest fit to what if you've got your original circle and you've got like something that might be a circle, you can give the exact equation that would describe the transformation needed from the original circle, that, to then go and describe that, which is also a circle, or that, or so in any sort of like, but that's just straightforward mathematics, straightforward geometry.
Yeah, it's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, if I can make it clear just very briefly, is in our reality, we require thinking to combine with our percepts to distinguish anything. And then we program these computers to distinguish things. But our consciousness is not in there doing the distinguishing. So if we cannot distinguish anything without consciousness in our reality, what is there a consciousness that is doing it for computers, sort of that we're not otherwise aware of? That's my question. Otherwise, how do computers do it if we cannot distinguish anything without consciousness?
This could go off into so many interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm just going to mention something here, and we might come back to this at some stage in the future. Do you remember us talking about Feuerbach in about chapter 14, 15, or 16 in Riddles of Philosophy?
Remind me what
he's one of the archetypal materialists. So like saying, it's like, idealism is a load of rubbish. There can't be anything to it. It's like everything has to be based in mathematics. I'm vastly simplifying a hugely complex and interesting man. Anyway, there's a series of lectures, 161, Artistic Knowledge of the World, or something like that. Steiner is describing how back in the 1800s, people who have a highly materialistic bent to their thinking, they didn't want sort of like other thoughts coming in. They wanted just sort of like physical reality, things that describe physical reality. And there's this passage that Steiner reads out where Feuerbach is saying, it's like, don't give me the thoughts of Saturn, don't give me the thoughts of Uranus, so like here to complicate the matters. I'm just interested in what the intellect can give me. And of course, so like in anthroposophical terms, that means so like was kind of like a form of prayer to Ahriman. Keep the spiritual world out. Anything that doesn't have to do with earth and matter, I don't want anything to do with it. I might have brought into like too broad a theme there, because obviously when I listened to this lecture, there's been half an hour of background leading into it. But what was I trying to convey? I'm trying to convey this idea that materialism has its function. Intellect has its function. It's hugely important for the I in creating a certainty of itself. Through my physical senses based thinking, I am able to gain a sense of security of myself, and that thinking that I create within me to understand that world. When I do understand things, I really do understand things, and there's this sense of this thinking being in me is enhancing my relationship within the world. Mm-hmm. And this is hugely important. Again, it's like one of the key themes throughout the Riddles of Philosophy is like this: the growth of I consciousness, and how initially it's the natural sciences, the service to humanity, amongst other things. Obviously, I'm just identifying one point, but the real service to humanity is giving it a grounding in its thinking. So the certainties that the sciences speak within becomes so convincing that the churches, the religions, they find it very difficult to offer counter arguments. They're bowled over with the strength of the thinking in the natural sciences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to me that the real danger here, and this is really chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Philosophy of Freedom, where he talks about what the religious impulse is, what the artistic impulse is, and what thinking's impulse or knowledge's impulse. They're all impulses toward a kind of knowledge.
Yeah.
And with science, natural science, as a sort of training ground for thinking, that's quite fine. But when people start to believe that thinking is that which is a bunch of borrowed concepts from from the so-called internet of humanity's ideas, say, then philosophy ceases as a creative act. So he speaks of every philosopher worth their salt is an artist in concepts. Well, what does that mean? It means a lot of things. It means that they're open to religious revelation. It means they're open to forming in their mind something more than a mere re-representation of a perceptual reality, but they're able to form in their mind a novel meaning that's never been uttered before. And the utterances aren't associative concepts. There's a meaning that's like music between the notes that exists within a sentence. So can you really learn language if you're not learning meaning at the same time in the language you're learning it? To go back to what you all were talking about as relates to teaching. And then the other thing about it is, if you lose the teacherly authority, this is Zach Stein's term that's becomes quite valuable to me. If you lose the teacherly authority, you lose the loving trust in somebody who has asymmetric knowledge that you need in order to level yourself up. So but the problem here, of course, is that the theory of knowledge that exists implicit in our society, mainstream, is that knowledge is associative thinking. It is just a puzzle piecing of things together. And mathematics are just one emblematic way that underlie the programming, of course, as you were mentioning, Angus. But that's just emblematic of putting together bits in not arbitrary way. I mean, because I can come up, I can probably ask GPT-3 to give me the Philosophy of Freedom.
Yeah, we should try
in contemporary language using Steiner's ideas, say. But that's not the way you read Philosophy of Freedom, is it?
Right. It'd be interesting.
Although there are people, sorry, I just want to add.
And that's not what he did when he created
the
the Philosophy of Freedom, and that's not what he did when he created Riddles of Philosophy. That's the importance also of the Riddles of Philosophy in its discovery mode. This is what I was discovering as I was writing it. Now I'm going to write an introduction to it to tell you what it is that I was discovered, and you will discover things too, because it's a process that has inside of it the religious impulse, the artistic impulse, and the self-conscious epistemic knowing of a first, second, and third kind.
So it would just be a heap of sticks, and it might look like a living thought or a living being or anything, but it wouldn't have this authority that it's someone you could relate to, and that someone who could help you, direct you, or enable oneself to develop and grow.
Right, and as kids, it wouldn't allow you to learn how to seek out people who know things better than you do, and who can lovingly teach you the meaning and the nuance of the things that they've learned and the lessons they've learned in their lives that help them unlock the keys of meaning within which you're of the subject matter in which you're conveying. There's no that's the difference between a bad teacher and a good teacher. We already know that. All we're asking, all that all that AI can offer is a bad teacher. Like,
I'm going to disagree there.
well, I just want to finish
I'm
that.
going to.
I just want to finish
Go
that
on.
thought.
Yeah.
It can offer a bad teacher, but you can't even learn the lesson of how bad that teacher was at, like, did they care? Did they not care about the subject matter? Were they mimicking some ideology, or were they not mimicking some sort of ideology? That's part of the education process, is discerning intuitionally people you can trust and people you can't trust. Not the knowledge itself. That's the least of the thing that children learn. Now, for adults, I can see it. I can see the utility of it. But here, the danger is that our theory of knowledge implicit in our mainstream culture is that the associative thinking is the way knowledge comes about. It's not, there is no other way knowledge comes about. And anything else is airy-fairy nonsense.
I wanted to just add to that, but also in the hands of a skilled teacher, it can also work really powerfully. I do believe. I let my pupils use Google at times to solve certain problems, and then I teach them how stupid Google is, how it got it wrong. And so I've got a feeling I might have mentioned this before, but I think if there's one catchphrase that my pupils will remember me for, if they remember me at all, of course, is Angus used to say, Google is a lot stupider than you think. And what I try to do is to give them direct experiences of that, but not where I sort of like, I get a load of examples. I encourage them to work with the tool at times and then tell them what they've actually said, what it means, because we're learning Spanish in these classes.
I'm sure that in the hands of a good teacher, any tool works very.
That's my perspective on it. This is a fascinating tool that can be used for good or bad.
But in a society that believes that knowledge is a puzzle piecing together of a complete or approximately complete picture, then that society will design its educational system around it. Now, we've already done that through the modern schooling system, through the industrial factory model, the jail model, the Prussian caste system model. That all has been now the computational model. And in that society, there'll be no room for the teacher in the classroom, because that's not, they're superfluous to knowledge.
Inefficient. Yeah.
Superfluous. I think, but it's right here in Philosophy of Freedom. It's a litmus test. Is it creative concepts that are being developed, and are the richness of the impulses the threefold impulses within that which is being conveyed. And this is going to become more and more and more important. This crux, these first two chapters of Philosophy of Freedom, are more important right now, and we're going to be more important 50 years from now, because they're a tool, speaking of tools, to tease out the difference. And then say, no, that's not knowledge. This is knowledge. And so let's be more explicit about what we mean by knowledge, and then let's form our systems around that idea. And then it's available in non-anthroposophical language right there in everyday speech in Rudolf Steiner's work.
If I may just interject, it's very interesting that on writing the book, Rudolf Steiner wrote to a good friend of his, Rosa Mayrida, who was a kind of an artist and poet in philosophical circles in Vienna at the time. And she said, I don't know what she said, but he said, you say that the book could be a lot bigger. And he's like, that's objectively true, but the point is, I wasn't there to teach. He actually wrote, I don't teach. So in response to what you're saying, Jeff, what this is, and I'm paraphrasing, is a testament to my struggles, the abysses and the challenges that I had to get through to the other side. And you don't know you're to the other side until you get there. And if I had stopped on the way to help others across, I don't think I would have made it. And he says, maybe now I could show 100 different ways in which they could, to guide people across to the same place. But he said at the time, what was important was to show the struggle. It's not like the perfect exposition of complete gathering of everything.
It's an individual's experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I that's one of my understandings of what actually the Riddles of Philosophy was. It was a more complete attempt to describe the state of soul, and he leads us through to the point that, the final chapter is essentially describing, without using the words, I believe, the exceptional state and what lies beyond this exceptional state. I don't know if you agree with that interpretation.
I struggle to remember the last chapter, but the whole.
He makes a case for anthroposophy that basically our thinking has got to grow beyond itself, because
the whole book
philosophy has lost itself in. Or he talks about the Hegelian system as being the perfect system of material thought. It's as far as material-based thinking can go. And then philosophy has exhausted its energies unless it can find a new realm in which to work.
And to parallel that, I feel he also points out that natural science has, if it fully realizes where it is, it's reached that same point too with Einstein's relativity theory, whereby there's no space and time in which everything is. Everything that it is the basis for physics is actually a relative between two
Mm-hmm.
things. So it's not anything out there that can just be discovered and finalized. And that's brought even further with the quantum theory today, where you cannot determine anything absolutely. If you determine its velocity, you don't know its position. If you determine its position, you don't know its velocity. So that, if physics and natural science understands itself, it has kind of reached the end point of what it is capable of. It cannot finalize everything. It's impossible. And so there needs to be and maybe it'd be good if you could kind of answer the question of what the exceptional state is. But I believe there needs to be some exceptional state that we enter or go through to get beyond our impasse.
Just before I give an attempted answer to that question, what is the exceptional state? And I think it's one of the absolute key concepts to understand in philosophy of freedom. I just wanted to invite Jeff and his own take on the final chapter of the Riddles of Philosophy. If you wanted to add something there, Jeff.
Well, I was just thinking about Hegel. So to answer that, before I answered, I'd like to ask a question just to leave for us, maybe for the future or maybe in this conversation. And that is, Angus, you mentioned that in that chapter he describes Hegel perfected material thought.
As far as you can go with a material brain.
And in doing so, he left us at a threshold, say, right? Similarly described when he talks about material science, and how it leaves us at a threshold because it's built on epistemological sand. But that aside, in Spiritual Science as a Foundation for Social Forms, he describes an evolution of thinking similar to riddles of philosophy, but with more esoteric um, and more an eye toward the Eastern thinking process or religious process that had run its course itself, and that in Middle Europe during the time of Hegel, what was coming to full fruition was not the spiritual impulse, but the impulse of the state, of the impulse of governance, and that Hegel's thinking as complete within the material brain also provided a perfect architecture for social structure, and that he spent a good portion of an era of his life then fleshing that out. And so my question is, how are those two things related? Why was his thinking in that time in history when the spiritual impulse had run dry and the impulse toward the political, say from a threefold standpoint, was in its full measure? Why would that kind of thinking be appropriate to the design of a state, say? So there's that. As far as the larger picture of the last chapter, I think that he by establishing all of these thresholds of limits that natural science, that material science and natural science and Hegelian thinking bring us to, itself, those limits point to an extension of consciousness beyond the normal consciousness that those have reached their culmination in, and so he establishes as an epistemological fact in that chapter that there is a method and a state of consciousness, the exceptional state, that one has to, each individual has to make a provisional self in order to participate in the transparency of creation as a whole, in order to enter that exceptional state. And then he gives some exercises to bring the will into thinking, and thinking into the will. And then that sets the table for the philosophy of freedom, as relates to broadening then out what that reality that of the exceptional state is, and providing a explicit theory of knowledge that is in direct juxtaposition to the artifactual knowledge that we were left with, because people are still transfixed, whether it's through technology or just through the training of associative thinking. So I wouldn't say that Riddles of Philosophy is a more complete work. It has a different mission, and that mission was to leave us off at the doorstep where Philosophy of Freedom picks up.
Yeah. So what I thought I'd do to move us forward in the conversation a little bit is I'm going to give my own take on three key terms in that have to do with this exceptional state, including the concept itself, and then see if it moves us forward, or let's see where it leads us in conversation. So there are three concepts. There's intuitive thinking, there's pure thinking, and then there's the exceptional state. So if I start with where I think they are, and then I'm not saying because I'm right, I'm saying it because I want us to talk about it if we agree or if we see it differently, okay?
Right, yeah.
So what is intuitive thinking in Steiner's world? And when I say Steiner's world, what I actually mean, in everybody's world. What is intuitive? He gives it the label intuitive thinking. If we really observe thinking, and so let's say, how does thinking come about? We realize that it is some conceptual thinking, the concept of a circle. We were talking about a circle, or the concept of statistics or the concept of a tree. If I stick with the tree as an example, so I can look at a million trees. My dog can look at a million trees. It will never say that is a tree. That is something, it's a concept that has come from beyond the tree. It's been created in myself, and it's something that has been, I've rather than using the word so a canon, so like to conceptualize, I like the words like birthing. I know, Jeff, you've used it a couple of times in different contexts, but we give birth to a concept when we begin to see the world like through a new lens, i.e. the ability to recognize a circle, an ability to recognize trees. If I do not have a concept of a tree, whenever I look into the world, I can never say, if I don't have that concept, I can't say that's a tree. But how this concept comes into being, this is what Steiner means by intuitive. It is, we give birth to it within ourselves, and then we see it in the outside world. But it isn't, as natural science will tell us, it's not the world imprinting itself on us. It is we recognizing an essential truth of the concept of a tree. We recognize it in ourselves first. It is born within us, and then we recognize it in the outside world. So I think that's what Steiner is talking about when he talks about intuitive thinking. So it's what we add to the perceived world to make it whole again, because obviously the concept of the tree is that or the group of concepts that are in a tree. And if I just go a little bit more specific here, the article I wrote recently where I talked about an oak, what is it that gives an oak tree it's like specific form to its leaves, its root structure, it's like the organization of the branches. There, all of these things require formative forces to create these structures, and these are all part of the concept of an oak tree. Now, depending on our knowledge of the oak tree, we're able to describe, so like at a more detailed level, as like the nature of this concept. But these are real forces that are manifested, so like in an oak tree. And all of those inner forces that live within the oak tree to shape it, the more they become an inner reality in us, the more we're able to recognize them in the outside world. Sticking with the oak tree still, I feel like I'm going on here a little bit, but I'm really trying to create clarity. I think it's called the phylum and the xylem in a tree. You've got, it's in a tree. A tree feeds itself. You've got photosynthesis going on with the leaves, and that's like that. The photosynthesis enables the tree to create its sugars. Or people can help me if I'm.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's to create these sugars, and then it's like with if it's the phylum or the xylem, I can't remember, but it then sends all of these fluids down so that the root system can continue to grow. But the root system is also drawing water so to lead up to the leaves where the whole photosynthesis can happen. And that's the phylum, xylem, the one that I can't remember. So you've got this upwards and downwards motion continually going on in any tree, and obviously in our oak tree as well. And that is a real process that has been created, and it's the formative forces behind that we are able to describe with our thinking. And the more we penetrate into life with concepts, the more we have this intense understanding of, wow, I mean, how how amazing life is, how rich it is, but that comes with thinking about it. And obviously there are feeling reactions to that as well, but it's through the conceptualization that we're able to understand the amazingness of nature and anything else in life. Okay, so that was all. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So you're saying two important things there, because material science would just say our thoughts about the tree are basically just kind of like a sieving of all the perceptions into kind of generalization. So all those, they'll say, yes, of course the laws are there. We see them. We see the sap rising up and going down. And the laws, our thoughts, are just the sort of generalized sieving of what's going on there. But what you're saying is that that understanding of those laws is not in what we see. We add it, but at the same time, it's intuited in that it's not it don't invent it, but it's actually intuiting the real being that is organizing that and bringing life.
Well, yes, and that intuitive thinking is the self-same process that is that is creating complex forms in the tree as it evolves in relationship to its environment, which was what thinking has to do as well, and it only does it when it's intuitive thinking. Because what we do in the other side of this, Angus, is intuition is a collection of concepts you already have, right? But they're your concepts, so they're living. They're not borrowed concepts, in as much as they have been part of this addition to that which is being observed, and and accurate to the actual processes, not just the what's the cotyledon and what's the full blown leaf, or what's systole and what's diastole. These are concepts that are either living for you or they're not living for you. And intuitive thinking then becomes the tree itself in the way it's coming into being. And so knowing is coming into being with that which you are in relationship to. That's how Goethe came to the archetypal plant, right? It was, of course, it came then into an exceptional state for him, which was an imaginal state, but only could get there because the intuitive thinking had put together all of these internalized mental pictures, concepts, into one whole mental picture that was living along with the tree as it itself lives. And so it became motional, say.
Yeah. Just adding like another dimension to what you're saying, but most people natural scientific thinking is also a result of intuitive thinking. They just don't recognize the nature of how those concepts are birthed within them. They see them as like already existing out there, and not that they have that concept has been birthed in them, and then they recognize it out there.
Bringing in the last chapter of Riddles of Philosophy again. He says that knowing can't be mimicry. Essentially, you can't be imitative. You can't create an imitated model of the thing that you're observing, or the thing that you're trying to come to know. It's way beyond biomimicry, which is part of the problem with the biomimicry movement. It's mimetic, right? And we have to go beyond mimetic and actually be a participant in the self-same processes, which is what our intuitive thinking is. So that last point that you made, they're doing it to some extent, but they're also denying that it is possible to do. And so the limits are becoming concretized, so much so that the institutions themselves train the limits as opposed to train that which provides for the evolutionary process in the human, for humanity as a whole, and developmentally for individuals.
Just thinking back to circles, we were talking about them, whether they're ever perfect or not, Jonathan. And that's also an example. We've said the perfect circle doesn't exist anywhere other than in the mind. Every circle we ever find in life will always be slightly imperfect. But there's still the concept of a circle. And it's that concept that allows us to recognize it. So the fact that we have never seen a perfect circle, yet we have the definition of a perfect circle, is proof in itself, if we pick it apart, as to how observation doesn't create thinking.
Mm-hmm. There has to be something else.
There's something else. And what is that something else? Jeff was alluding to it there. So if we move on to the exceptional state, what is that in? What is my take on what that is in with Steiner? When we understand the correct relationship of intuitive thinking and how something is birthed within us, we begin to experience this. We experience this question of, it's like, where is this birthing happening from? How is this being created in me? And we begin to experience it. We can experience it in lots of different ways. It can be it's like we can hear, we can have we can have experiences that, let's say, that are somewhat like a waking dream. In a dream, we are usually unconscious of ourselves, and we hear things in our dreams, and we see things, and we watch things in our dreams, and we're subjected to things in our dreams, but we've lost ourselves. In the exceptional state, what happens is we are crystal clear about the fact that something is happening inside me and I observe it. I am not guiding this process. I am observing a process that is happening within me. And if in my case, especially so when I'm meditating, sometimes what can happen is it's like a very strong image will present itself to me in a way that I experience it as, this isn't something I can relate to something that's part of my own experience. It's like on planet Earth, if I put it like that. So like all my history, all my past and that type of thing, I experience it as, this has a different quality about it. And in this exceptional state, we are so we're retaining an awareness of, I live in the physical world, but at the moment I am in a different state, and rather than using my eyes and my ears to see and to hear, there is something in me that is creating imagery, or that is creating words or sentences that I cannot directly relate to this world. And as we deepen with meditation, the idea is you use your will, and it doesn't have meditation, contemplation, concentration, prayer. These are all methods of imposing your own will on your inner life. And in the final chapter of Riddles of Philosophy, Steiner talks, and we talked about this as well, that the necessity of having an artifice, as a term that Jeff has used a couple of times as well, to create pictures. We are consciously aware that these are my own constructs. But once we've done that often enough, what starts to happen is other pictures start presenting themselves, or the pictures that we're working with, or the thought that we're working with, a new dimension is added to it. One that I, just like with intuitive thinking, I experience that it has been given to me rather than something that I've worked out logically. There's a creative act that happens within that inner state.
Are you saying it's given in the sense that it's not just sort of coming in accidentally or arbitrarily to the thought, but it's the thought's developing it out of itself?
That can definitely be part of the definitely part of my own experience, that I can have a question in my mind, and I'm, rather than, I don't know, what could you do? It's like a SWOT analysis, or so like any type of analysis, to try and arrive at a question. But instead, you let the question or the experience just live in your soul, in your inner life, and you've shut out the outer life. And then this creative process happens within you, where suddenly, bang, a new thought is given to you, or a new picture, which adds a dimension to whatever it was you were working with before. And it's not something. One of the characteristics for me is that it takes me a step further. If I can just explain it like that, there's an experience of, I was there in my thinking, and now suddenly something has been given to me that takes me beyond where I was stuck in my thinking before. And in that sense, it's gift. As a religious person, specifically a Christian, would be happy using the words like grace or something like that here. But it is directly an experience of something else lived in me for a little while and moved my thinking forward, or helped me arrive at like the next step.
Is it you? Is it you? I mean,
if you see,
this is from philosophy of freedom standpoint, this is the revelation aspect that he talks about in what the religious person does to come to know things. Right. So we'll set that aside for the hot minute.
No. It's a really good point.
Serious.
I think you want to.
Another being that's entered into you, or.
This is. I'm going to. Now we can link into the ant's nest. Okay. So, in this series of lectures 161, Steiner's again talking about this exceptional state, and he says one of the first experiences of a person, it's like once they become like intensely alive in this process, is we're accustomed to, he describes, we've heard this described multiple times, as with shadow thoughts and lifeless thoughts that like live in us but don't really affect us. There's a certain amount of control we probably have over them. And he says, once you enter this other world, he says it's like sticking your head in an ant's nest, because instead of there being like a dead thought here and a dead thought there and a dead thought there that just like lie there dead, you feel how each thought is a being that has its own life and that it will develop. We're in it. we are in a substance of thinking, and unless we can retain ourselves, we could easily get lost. It's like in all of these billions of, it's like thinking beings, these ants that are around our heads. And that's where the training comes in. I mean, you can see sort of links to like split personalities, and I'm going to tackle your question directly in a second, Jeff, but it's a really vivid picture of thoughts become living. They have their own life. They're not something that I am trying to hold and trying to move forward. They have their own life, and all I have to do is observe, just like I observe with my sensory vision or with my audio vision. So they are realities once we are able to enter into this state. And then to your question, Jeff, okay, so what is it that's creating in these? That's the big question. Is it something that's inspired by Christ? Is it something that's inspired by Ahriman? Is it something that's inspired by Lucifer? And remember, Ahriman is part of what has given us, it's like the sound, sound is incorrect word. The certainty of individual awareness is part of this impulse. So we need to be careful about dismissing, so like, or so like labeling something as purely evil, and instead understand it in the context, I believe, of how it helps humanity in its own development of consciousness forward, and in the sense that individual consciousness is a result of humanity interacting with Luciferic Ahrimanic spirits. This is a necessary part of our path, which we then leave behind us once we've learnt the lessons of having worked in their schools, as it were. I chucked out a lot there, but I tried to unpack a little bit how we might understand the exceptional state. What are your thoughts on either what you've heard, or it's like different thoughts or disagreeing thoughts?
It seems to me, I don't know. As with you, I kind of, thinking my way through this as we go. That you're describing, normally I might be thinking about a subject, and I feel like my activity thinks this about it and then that about it, and then I've forgotten the other bit, and then the other bit's gone because I think about the new bit, and then the other, and then I sort of think a little bit more, and I get to another bit. But when you enter this exceptional state, that all comes alive. And so this picture of the ant's nest, the teeming, like, wriggling, buzzing nest of living activity, puts a whole different perspective on it. So now that subject becomes alive in itself, and I could maybe adjust my observation of it or my relationship to it, but it nevertheless is quite obvious that I'm not creating it in the sense, I might be producing it into my consciousness, or introducing it into my consciousness, but it is very much its own thing, developing and showing and not showing and so forth, what it is about. So yeah, I just trying to sort of grasp this idea that it's not it is a different thing in the sense that if we normally have just the shadows and then this is the reality, but again, it's the same thing in the sense that we're having intuitions all the time and developing our thoughts, and it might we might go, oh, that's given to me, I don't know where from, but then you're speaking of this exceptional state where you can enter, where it becomes quite obvious where it's coming from, because it's it's this life that is going on.
Whilst you were describing that, Jonathan, I mean, the choice of words you used led me directly to Plato's cave. It's the same image, ant's nest, Plato's cave, and the question we're asking ourselves is, how can we stop looking at the shadows, leave the cave, and interact with the beings that are creating the shadows? This is the exact same metaphor, and Steiner is telling us.
Yeah.
Start creating an active inner life. Start as like a form of esoteric schooling, meditation, prayer, contemplation. And if you direct enough will energy to that inner life, eventually the spirit world will tear down the veil.
Yeah. That's good to reference that. It's very interesting because it sounds to me like as one puts will into it and becomes more aware of the will, because one's putting more in it, then that will takes on a life of its own, in a sense. That's what I'm getting.
I give you. There's another picture he gives in the same set of lectures. He says, imagine it's like imagine a bright yellow bottle. Okay, so you got this bright yellow bottle, and it's translucent, and you break it, and you spread out all that yellow across the universe, and the yellow is still all there, but it's so diluted that we're not capable of experiencing that yellow. And what we're doing with our will force is we are pulling together that yellow again, so that eventually it becomes something that is observable for us.
Wow.
So it's the engagement of our will forces by repeatedly, time and time again, turning to, it could be certain pictures, symbols are specifically valuable, but it can be mantras or verses, but things that we constantly, where we have to use our will to like stop everyday trains of thoughts about like the mundane world, the exterior world. The deeper we can go into that process with our will eventually lead to pulling these forces back together so that we actually experience how they are real forces that are everywhere.
Yes, and to add another to the list of possibilities is, of course, the philosophy of freedom, to follow as much as one is able in the struggles over the abysses and through the thickets.
Yeah.
I'd like to pick up the imagery of the ant's nest. That's not going to leave me soon. I have to go find that. So what is an ant's nest? It's this, if you stuck your head in one and you didn't get bit to death, but you just experienced what Jonathan referred to as the teeming nature of it. If you were trained and you stuck your head in that ant's nest, you'd be seeing ants doing purposeful things as one organism. So you wouldn't have you'd have a full recognition of the pattern of the behaviors of the pure will of those ants moving about, doing their each having their own task in a meaningful pattern of in relationship to a changing environment, say. It seems to me modern life, in a way, is a training ground in and of itself, with all of the perceptions that are seemingly disconnected coming at us, to be able to make the patterned connections as relates to what is underlying all of this seemingly disparate and fractionated behaviors and sensory perceptions and media onslaughts and such, is a bit of a training for sticking your head in the ant's nest of the exceptional state, and then once there, being able to discern the laws of the realm in which you've stuck your head.
Nice deepening of the picture there, Jeff. The harmony that lives in that ant's nest, the intelligence that lives in that ant's nest,
Wisdom.
the wisdom that lives in that ant's nest is all something that also needs to be intuited before it's recognized. It needs to be birthed in us before it can be recognized. But it's there already. It's just we don't know it.
Right.
I think it's going to be hot in there too. I have a great impression of warmth because, on the outside, that looks quite cool. Stick your head in it. It's going to be pretty warm.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the third concept because I said I was going to talk about a third concept. So what's pure thinking? This is another word that I think is potentially confusing. It certainly has been for me in the past, and I'm not claiming to have it completely nailed down, but I do feel as if I've got it clearer. It's the ability to think conceptually without any reference to a specific form. It's the ability to work with concepts. It's the ability to work with concepts and leaving them undetermined. So what do I mean by that? For example, again, coming back to our circle, if instead of imagining a circle specifically as one circle of a specific dimension, it's like in my head, I am able to think of the circle in its conceptual form, in all its possibilities. And then I relate that to other concepts also at a conceptual level rather than in a definite given specific form. Then I think that's what is meant by pure thinking. But also possibly that when we're in this, when we have intuitive thinking, or when these ideas are given birth to inside us, that we are able to let them continue to grow in us without referring back to the outside world. I feel my explanations is less clear on this pure thinking. It's described as thinking about thinking, and the real emphasis for me is on getting away from connecting it to outside world. It's like material phenomena, and experiencing them in the richness. So I think one example of Steiner, it's like saying thinking about thinking. It's like you can have what seems like a horribly abstract phrase like wisdom lives in light. There, what does that mean? But if we can find a way of working inwardly inside ourselves without trying to visualize what that means, but let the words work in us, then what can also happen, like in the meditative exceptional state I was describing earlier, they in themselves generate something new, or a new relationship between how wisdom lives in light, or why light is thinking. Light is thinking. Okay, go away, meditate on that. One of the fruits that you might come up with is, okay, so if you have a clear understanding, and I'm not saying anything at all complicated here. One way of understanding what light is, it is quite literally, it is that which enables me to see. If I think also we've had this example before in a past video, that if I go out into a green field at midnight and there's no moon, the green grass isn't green. The green grass is black, and everything is black. There's nothing. It's like I'm in a black world. Light comes in and it adds a dimension. It makes things visible that were not visible before. I mean, it sounds ridiculously simple what I'm saying, but that's an essential description of light. Thinking does exactly the same thing. When I think clearly about things, I see things that were previously invisible to me. And this is an example for me of how, when we just meditate on this content, that suddenly we see things that are so blindingly obvious to us. I don't think there's anybody would disagree with it by two descriptions of light and thinking there. But the truth of them needs to be born within us, and that actually only happens when we turn this inner activity inwards, intensify it so that it can reveal an obvious truth, like where light is thinking. They are two manifestations of the same essential essence. So that was my best attempt so far. That was an attempt to clarify these three important concepts: intuitive thinking, exceptional state, and pure thinking.
It's interesting because in a certain sense, particularly with the pure thinking, because we've just been talking about that these are like that. On the one hand, we're talking about something that you can say it's esoteric. It's the beginning of something that is not normally considered, and that we could use terms like spiritual and so forth. On the other hand, it's just, in a sense, very mundane, and what these kind of things have been termed an open secret, in the sense that pure thinking is not the thinking as I understand it, which is the same as you, Angus. It's not the thinking of, like, if we're thinking and talking about the politics of the day, or how to construct a bridge using this material, or how to get my car to somewhere, but mathematics is pure thinking about thinking, because if you just take mathematics purely in itself, so you abstract it from the bridge and the materials and everything, that is thinking, and then you can be thinking about that thinking and entering a world of pure thinking through something as mundane as mathematics. So there's a point, I think, where we can use mathematics all the time without ever realizing that we're entering, or at least heading towards, an exceptional state. And all it needs is kind of like a recognition of what is actually there in front of us, and just to sort of from my perspective, what's not clear to me in my understanding of pure thinking is how is there kind of an exceptional state of pure thinking whereby it's completely, the thought is completely devoid of all kind of content borrowed from the concepts. Because, for example, if I think of 1+1, in my mind there's these kind of like vague figures of like the numeral 1 and plus symbol and 1. So
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? How that is pure thinking if I'm only purely thinking about mathematics, but how pure is my thinking of that if I still have these kind of vestiges in my mind of of sense content?
Okay. I thought you brought up. I'm going to. These aren't like thought of as sort of like answers to your question. They're like further reflections on the interesting things that you said about mathematics. I think Steiner talks about the importance of geometry in his own development, which is also obviously you can see it, but it can become a pure internal experience that is nothing related to the outside world. It's pure mathematics happening in your head, but visualized. And I think this might be one of the reasons why I've focused on geometric forms and rotating them in your head. It's like skewing and compressing and growing and shrinking, and these type of exercises in the esoteric school. I think from that perspective, they are particularly interesting because when you start trying to do this in your head, it forces you to think mathematically, but you've got no reference to the outside world. You've got your own conception of all these mathematical truths that you know about, this mathematical language that you know for describing the world, but instead of applying to the outside world, you're applying it to the triangle that's in your head, or a pyramid, or whatever the form is you've chosen to meditate on. And I think this might be one of the reasons why these were also given as fruitful meditation practices. There are lots of others, because mathematics. If I try to, we did a little bit with this circle, didn't we? That's our circle. And if I, instead of like doing this in physical life, I do this in my head. I have to describe that to myself. What is happening to all those points on that line as I move it through that transformation? So that was one of the things that you're thinking.
That's very, very interesting. I'm wondering how this relates to the thing coming alive within itself, in the sense that as I rotate that circle, I'm not, individually redrawing it or checking every single point, but as I turn or say bend it, I instantly know if I've deformed it out of shape and it's no longer a circle, even though I'm not checking it every individual sort of point. So somehow there's something there that's telling me, in a sense.
Do you remember your reaction to? Do you remember that involution evolution graphic I put up a couple of times ago? When we had the Sophia Anthroposophia, that one there. I remember your reaction was probably the strongest of the four of us in there. About, you could feel your sort of like your more visceral as an artist reaction to it. You were trying to perform that exercise immediately when you saw it. And this is the value of, so we've got to, as we intensify this experience, we are trying to move these things in our mind. We are expending mental energy. So one of the things that you can do if you've got it, you can like try converting a triangle into a square. This is all you're doing. This all in your mind, okay? And try to redraw it and try to not lose concentration and all these type of things. And so, what am I going to do to transform a triangle into a square? Well, I can do a couple of things. I can sort of like I can take away that one, draw a line up there, and then one across there, or I can sort of like imagine this point up here. I'm gonna force those two apart, and then I'm going to draw a line across there. But all of these, this is going to bring us to our thinking exercise, which is the original reason we set up this meeting. But as I force that apart in my mind, I can actually feel the mental energy I'm expending to force them apart. So feeling also begins to live in my meditation. It's so that experience of forcing apart that I choose to do in this particular example, that has nothing to do with outside life. That is something that has been generated purely in my own being because of an act of will. And again, it's like the more often I do these type of mental exercises, the more this inner life becomes an inner life, if I can describe it like that.
A life, yeah, that's inner. And just because you mentioned the exercises, I just wondered, because I'm kind of wondering if I'm feeling, Jeff, I know you've got a cold, how your energy's going. Okay.
Okay, so in actual fact, let me introduce it to what we've been going on to anybody who's ends up watching this video. There's an interesting guy called Jürgen Strube, and he's created 50 or so exercises so that you can observe your own thinking. A genuine student of somebody who's like saying, well, I'm going to take this idea of Steiner seriously. I'm going to really start observing my thinking. And the first exercise he has in his book.
Sorry, Angus, before you go on, can you just translate the book? So it's Rudolf Steiner's the
observation of thinking, die Beobachtung des Denkens.
Okay.
And Rudolf Steiner's The Philosophy of Freedom as a way to formative force cognition.
Okay, thank you.
I do believe it's been translated to English. I'm not 100% sure. When we finish this stream, I'll add a detail that I don't want to add in the stream. Okay, I can come back to that. Yes,
fine. I just wondered what he's saying there.
He does have his own website. I have tried to get in contact with him. He hasn't contacted me back, but who knows? He might be if he wants to like talk to us about his book. Is something quite special that he's offered to serious students of the observation of thinking, which is what the Philosophy of Freedom is telling us to do. Start observing your own thinking. Don't think about the outside world. Think about your thinking, the processes. So anyway, the first exercise he has is, I'll read it, and then we can compare notes if you like, because we both did this exercise. So he tells us to imagine the following situation as realistically as possible, as if you were experiencing it yourself. At the top of a completely flat but inclined surface, for example, a slightly sloping wooden board, two balls of equal size and of similar appearance, glass, are released. One ball rolls down the slope quickly after being released and rolls to a stop at the bottom. The other ball moves slowly, a few centimeters, and then stops on the slope. After a few seconds, it rolls very slightly backwards with a jerk, and then rolls a few centimeters further forward, and then stops still again on the slope. This type of jerky motion continues until this ball finally reaches the other ball, where they both lie still. What happens in you during or after you imagine such event? Okay. Jonathan, what happened to you when you did this exercise?
This was such an interesting exercise. It's an interesting exercise to kind of follow, but to see what happened to oneself in doing it. I mean, that is the exercise, obviously, but very interesting to experience these two balls. But so essentially, what I sort of got out of it, looking at it after the fact and observing what went on within me during it, was the first ball that just rolls down the slope and then gradually comes to a stop. I was very kind of just passive, observant, and sort of uninvolved. There's no particular emotion there, except a sort of interest in the look of the ball, shiny, smooth brass ball. Some sort of enjoyment in the smoothness of it rolling down. A slight expectation of a very sort of slight wonder, sort of when is it going to stop, kind of thing. But with the other one, it was quite a different experience. So it starts off like the other, and then it stops, and there's like this consternation enters in, and it starts there for a few seconds. So there's like curiosity, and then it moves backwards. There's surprise, and instantly I'm really involved. So there's not that same just kind of passive observation going on. There's real interest. And I would go so far as to say that it is even a point of a kind of like an empathy, in the sense of like traveling along with the ball. So, just this real difference between just observing, okay, there's a ball, it's going down, it's very lovely, and it stops. And with this, I kind of like in there with the ball on it, because so. In religious circles, you call this the passion, like you're sharing the trials and tribulations. We can't really use those words for a ball, but
definitely, I think wonderful.
Yeah, what is going on? And it was very energizing. It really brought the whole experience to life in a way that wasn't present in the sort of relatively inert observation of the first one.
Did you want to add something there, or are you done?
That's it. Yeah, that's all I can say.
It's so lovely hearing you describe it and how different it was from my experience.
Oh, wow.
this is I recognize parts of what you're saying. I'll describe, but this is the importance of community. Angus's way of thinking about things isn't the right way. It's one way. Jonathan's isn't the right way. It's another way. Jeff's isn't the right way. It's another way. No. And in that...
Did you do it, Jeff?
What's that?
Did you do it yet? Or...
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I was just reacting to that last statement, because clearly my way is the right way of thinking.
Of course it is, Jeff. you can tell us the right way after I told you how I did it wrong. Okay.
If you just put your head in my ant's nest, you'll see the lawful nature of my seemingly chaotic processes.
You might
anyway, I want to hear. Yeah.
So I actually. So my brass ball, just like Jonathan's, like rolled down there. There was my brown wooden board. I'd chosen a chip board, like an old piece of boarding that's something similar to the stuff that I've got out in the barn. I was like, it happily rolled down there. It's like just got to the bottom and it just like stopped. It did like it was told to do in the reading. I could then go back, and when I thought about it afterwards, I realized, well, it could have carried on rolling. Why did it just come to a stop there? But it was actually my own experience with the jerky ball. And again, I tried, I really honed in on the word centimeters here. And I really wanted to make it an internal film. So I actually had to put a ruler on my wooden board, and it had to roll down a couple of centimeters, stop, roll back, and then roll 2 centimeters back, roll forward. And it had to do this all the way. And because I had decided my ruler was 20 centimeters long, I had to do that process at 20. And the sense of relief after when it finally came over was like, thank God that's over. But then, so you've been through this process, and the real value is then thinking about it as well. It's like, what all of this, the extreme exertion that was needed to, I felt the discomfort of stopping the flow of the ball. It was like, oh, I've got to stop it again. And then it's like an interior feeling of effort to roll it back a centimeter and then release. And literally, release means sigh. I can breathe out. And it rolled down and then back. So I thought that was fascinating how, and so true to life as well, in the thinking process of how emotions are so intimately linked into this thinking process. We talk a lot about thinking here, but the whole time, all of these thoughts that we're having, they have an emotional impact. But in this particular one, the laborious nature, the repetitive nature, really weighed quite heavily on me.
Wow, because you were similar to me. You were completely involved in a different way, but you were right there. Yeah.
But one of the things you picked up on that I missed, and this is when I wrote to you, I said I'd done it incorrectly, is I didn't have this question of why. Because if you then go to the book and there's a summary of the point he's trying to make and its relationship to the philosophy of freedom. He says that's if this was happening in real life, you'd have been asking the question, well, what's causing this to happen? And that thought didn't happen to me because I knew it was me. Do you know what I mean? I had decided this ball was going to stop. So when he's after I'd done the exercise, I read the summary. I thought, oh wow, that wasn't. I still got a lot out of it, but it wasn't what he had intended with the exercise, which in itself is telling. It's interesting because we are individuals.
Yeah.
We aren't robots. We don't all do these things in the same ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. So he was even more dispassionate. He was more dispassionate in the sense than either of us, because he just watched the ball go down and asked why. From what you're saying, whereas I was like there with it, lost in its
I was almost a little bit annoyed with him. He said, imagine the following. That's exactly what I did. I was fully 100% responsible for every frame of my internal film. Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. Jeff, what did you get out of it?
Well, the first ball, there's an elegance to the sleekness that Jonathan mentioned. That was a feeling I had as well. There was also that ball will be fine because it's following a law, because suddenly you're comparing the two, or I was comparing the two, I should say. And I was a little bit frustrated at first at the other ball that it didn't follow the same predictability. And then it was comical. Like those movements are sort of like a comedian doing physical comedy, or a child's toy. And then it was like, well, what's the agency moving? There's something internal to it because there's no strings here. there must be something in it that is making it reverse field, resist the gravitational pull to the bottom. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, how did that other one stop? Right? It was an incline. Did it did I miss something in the did it hit a flat surface?
Yeah.
Did it roll a little ways on the flat surface? Did it roll back if it wasn't flat, say? But so then the feeling was nagging that there's some agency in the other ball too, because it must have come to rest to some extent as unnaturally smoothly in a way. My board was a wooden cutting board because that's my work. I'm a chef, so I like wooden cutting boards when I'm using my knife. And then it was kind of like relief when the other ball finally followed its path, and I didn't have to be bothered with it anymore. It was something along those lines. Was there anything else? No. I felt that whatever agency was, it was mechanical, and I didn't feel like I could sort of empathically enter it, which is, I think, part of the feeling of frustration. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's like there's Mexican jumping beans, or I think I've seen a ball operate in that way. So if it's hollow and it has like a weight on one, on the side, that will pull it back, and then it will actually go back a little bit and then continue. So, but yeah, strange business. So it was the question. It was the questioning that was supposed to be that this exercise was kind of highlighting.
The exercise. Let me. In the summary, he basically says something along the lines of that you two did it more correctly, if you like, or the way he intended it, because you started asking the question. We had the physical observation, and we were asking ourselves the question, why? What is causing this to not act like the ball that just rolled all the way down? And this is an essential aspect of, it's like how we view nature. We use thinking to fill in gaps or to explain things that are happening.
Yeah. Well, you performed that function. You asked that question, and you immediately answered, "It has to be me."
It's me.
There's nothing else that can do it here.
It's the logos. But there was one thought that also fed in afterwards, which I thought was interesting, and it was train of thoughts, or that's like this, because really that the ball that rolled down there effortlessly, it's like a lot of thinking happens without us being involved. It's got its own inner momentum, and we follow it through. I mean, I've got certain routines at work. We've all got routines at work that we can follow through. They might be quite complex processes, but we don't. They have become so ingrained into our way of acting that we can do them almost without thinking, without paying attention to them. And this is something that, as we become more aware of our thinking, we are not there in a train of thoughts, or there's the possibility that we're not there with our ego consciousness in a train of thoughts. They just happen, and we let them passively happen. Whereas in our jerky ball, I had this sensation much more of, I've got to stop, observe, stop, observe, stop, observe, stop, observe, think, stop, observe, think, stop, observe, think. And I linked this to, I remember Steiner writing about Hermann Grimm. He was a German art critic, amongst other things. He did like some important works on Michelangelo, amongst other people. And Steiner references him quite a bit in some of his conferences, and he talked about the difference between someone like Herman Grimm, who has to fight for every sentence, and someone like Roosevelt, who does a type of automatic thinking, where sort of like the words sort of like just come out without any. There's they were. How can I say it?
It's as though inspired. Or...
He wasn't involved in their creation.
So yeah, I remember this. So they are both writing about the same subject, aren't they?
That's right.
And Rudolf found it phenomenal that they almost were saying the same thing, but you could sense that Herman had worked through those thoughts, and so it came differently than this that was just kind of a bland nothing that had just sort of plopped down from the other.
So it reminded me strongly of that. So like how we, the importance of being conscious with like in every step of thinking, and the ball that just rolled down there. That was, I mean, we even have that phrase in English, don't we? A train of thoughts. It gives the ideas that sort of like the train has left and it's inevitably going to arrive at its destination, and I don't need to worry about how it gets there. And obviously there are inherent dangers in thinking like that, because what if one of your assumptions in that train of thoughts is wrong?
But what's the difference between that and then this exceptional state that we've spoken about, where the thoughts have a life of their own?
I wouldn't say they have a life of their own. I would say that they're alive, and that that as living, they're part of us, and they're part of the world. Maybe this is what Steiner means by the ego being outside us, and the ego being a complex living organism within a complex living organism that is not bounded by hard sensory bindings, if you will, and self-imposed parameters.
I'm going to try and answer that question from a slightly different perspective, whilst agreeing with what you're saying there, Jeff. Steiner had a strong aversion to automatic writing, automatic painting, automatic anythinging. Why was that? Because it meant a dampening of ego consciousness. So if your ego isn't involved in the process, if you're not consciously aware, then you don't know what can be slipping inside unknown. Is this idea of the potential danger of unknown thoughts, like mixing, getting themselves involved in the mix.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what I'm saying also, in a different way, that and I'll use contemporary society as an example here. You can just be 1 degree off on a concept, and you let that concept run on the wrong track, and a certain time later, you'll be so far off the aim of where reality would have taken you if you would have checked the reality with the intuitional thinking. So this starts to bring together the 3 elements, doesn't it? That pure thinking has a place, but is an important part of an integrated threefold thinking that has intuitional thinking, checking your living body of concepts, that the ant's nest, for the patterns that are happening as you're moving along the track, because nothing stays the same, and the fluidity it takes to perceive that which is ever changing as that which is also pattern sameness over time allows you to stay on the front edge of the novelty and be part of the creative process. then that's just in plain, even non-philosophical language, let alone spiritually esoteric language.
Yeah.
I see
And
we're
it
getting
also
nice
ties.
comments along in the comment box.
Sorry, say again.
We're getting some nice comments in the comments box.
All right. Oh yeah. Cool. It's forbearance.
Obviously, this forbearance person is very smart.
And then there's this Alex Artson, who's quite often commented as well.
Awesome.
Nice to see you guys. Send us a question if you got one, although we'll be wrapping up soon. Jeff, I wanted to also add to what you were saying there because I thought it was valuable. Yeah, there's also this concept in thinking that, again, coming back to the value of natural science is a training ground for critical thinking, because critical thinking becomes a lot more difficult if you've got your head stuck in an ant's nest. If you're working with living beings that are continually changing, it becomes completely new levels of responsibility are placed on your thinking, on you yourself as a thinker. Because Schneider describes it like this: if I make a mistake let's say I'm designing a bridge and I make some assumptions, reality will correct my assumptions. If I underdimension that bridge, or let's take an example for you, Jeff. If you just suddenly decide that putting lots of, I don't know, lemon or thyme in a certain dish might make it a lot better, and you might be convinced about that, and then you go and serve it to your customers and they all start complaining, you've got somebody correcting your thinking. You had an assumption and reality corrects you. Once we move into the spiritual worlds, we don't talk about correctional thinking. We think about thinking that has consequences, different consequences. And so I also think I'm linking that into what you were saying about bringing this ant's nest metaphor to life. Are really useful.
There are two things I want to say to that. One is that living organisms develop, and what we're talking about in thinking is a living organism. And in intuitive thinking, we pull the elements of the way in which we constructed the elements of that organism that we brought about through our mental picturing process, and apply the proper concept to the particular moment, or a group of concepts as an amalgam of concepts to the particular moment. And as you say, the relevance will get a feedback loop on the relevance, and that's the sense for concept. The sense of concept is already inbuilt in our framework. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, you were mentioning earlier, and I think this is related to when you were talking about the exercises, and that you were that you were involving feeling and willing, but particularly you were talking about feeling, and that you are sort of allowing your feeling life to, correct me if I'm wrong, but to be lawfully formed, say. But the other thing about that exercise is that it asks you, say, to take thinking, feeling, and willing in the soul sense of those three words into the spiritual world as an intact um, um, perceptual and cognitive organism. So it's not just that it's this thinking body is alive, that it's living. It also has feeling and willing in it. It is you reproduced or realized at a higher level in that exceptional state. So now we have pure thinking, the exceptional state, and intuitive thinking related to thinking, feeling, and willing. What do you think about that?
The inner life is far richer than just thinking, isn't it?
And way more complex. The exceptional state is a place that has its own ontological lawfulness, and it's way more complex than the perceptual world we live in, even though that's quite complex. It's way more complex. And we're not afforded the ability to separate, fractionate concepts in order to feel safe, right? So you better get this right before you enter that exceptional state. Otherwise, it's going to blow you apart.
Like I think we might have experienced with a couple of people in our group.
At least one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm looking at the time. Alex Artson has asked a question. I thought if I just read that question, and then we'll use that as the wrap up. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I just tried to answer him. I just threw.
You did. Okay.
Yeah.
So Alex says, is it the ego that's written the book? I guess is what he's saying. Is it the ego that wrote the book, saying, "Read my knowledge; it is the truth. Follow it, study it."
Yeah,
absolutely. No, sorry, go on, Jeff. You laughed first. Go on, give your take on that question.
Oh, I just love that image. It reminds me of that Elvis Costello song. Every day, every day, every day I write the book. That's what that artist is talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I responded, yeah, that as Jeff mentioned, if the true ego is outside ourselves, then that ego could be writing the book and introducing it to this ego, just as it's writing our lives, the things that I want to meet.
Well, it's writing it in light, right? And
Right.
isn't that starting to speak of what the Akashic record is? It's the book that's written in light, and we read it. Except that it's more than reading, of course, in the abstract sense.
Look at that. Look what our thing can show us. That's cool. I didn't realize I could click it. That was the question. Cool. The question he asked.
The only thing is we can't. Sorry, just a technical point. We can't reply to that chat in stream. You have to go to YouTube, as far as I can work out, to reply to that chat with a chat. So yes, we can reply to it.
I can here, but perhaps you can't. But we can look at that separately. I thought what was interesting is how really the nub of the question is what do you mean by ego? Do you mean the lower ego that we are more commonly aware of, or are we talking about the higher ego? And if we're talking about the higher ego as a reflection of the logos, then yes. But if it had just been the production of a mere lower ego, then no, you don't follow it, study it, or teach it. You you bring it to life within yourself. This exceptional state is going to be just like you don't want to see the world through other people. That sounds crass when I say it like that, but I see the world through my eyes. I see the world. I hear the world through my ears, and I interpret it through that. And the exceptional state is that eye as a needle through which we need to pass, and then through which we begin to reinterpret.
In a way, we've come full circle here, because what you were just what we were going to say is what I would have said, which is you don't want to let your book be written by other people, because who knows who sponsored their ideas, right? And so you have to be able to test those ideas yourself. So that's why Rudolf Steiner calls it spiritual science, right? But the dangers of the technologies that we have at our disposal is that we export that the writing of the book to GPT-3, And then we're not authors as readers, because the thing about listening to music or reading a book that is truly creatively wrought is that you have to become a composer of the work alongside of the person of the author or the composer who did the work. Otherwise, you're not participating in the creative process that is what art is.
Yeah, and we can't possibly master all that, or at least not instantly. We can master some of some books we read, but not every thought that comes our way.
I thought that was beautifully put, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I'm going to need to wrap up here, so
Yeah, me too.
I'll just press end of stream.